So hello everyone and welcome to this practice webinar around managing agile testing. My name is Joel and I'm Chief Solution Architect here at PractiTest, and I'm going to be taking you over this webinar. Sitting next to me is Noah, our marketing manager, and she's also going to be moderating the session. So as a reminder, the idea of these webinars is basically a webinar series. This is the second one of the series, and the idea is to provide you with some information that we have been gathering out of our interaction with tens, if not hundreds, of our customers who are working on agile projects, and out of the questions and all the again repeated questions and dialogues that we've been having with them. So let's get started, and I guess that we want to start by understanding what do we want to cover today. Okay. What we want to do today, it's basically to start. First of all, I want to start by going over a little bit of the concepts that we talked on the last webinar. And again, I'm going to try to do it very quickly for the people who were already on that session. I think it's a good reminder of that. Then what I want to do is I want to talk in general about the aim of test management as a process and focusing on agile projects. And it's going to be clear about what I want to do there, but I want to give a little bit of a twist of how are we approaching our test management processes and projects in order to provide you with more ideas on how to approach your agile test management process. Then we want to go over a section where we're taking part of the tips and the ideas that we're getting from our customers and just pass along to everyone. And I guess that the most interesting part of these sessions it's the Q&A section that we have at the end. And again, the idea is that if you have any questions or something that you want to review, then you can go ahead and ask them throughout the whole session. You can start right now, or obviously as we're talking about something, Noah is going to be moderating these questions. And after we talk about that, we will have about 20-25 minutes to go over these questions together. Okay, so let's get started. And again, I think that the first thing is to learn a little bit about me if you're going to be listening to me for the next couple of minutes. So, well, this is how it looked like. Wish it would look a little bit better, but this is what you got so far. And well, my name is Joel, obviously, as I said, and I've been in testing for quite a while. I've done all sorts of roles, starting from a regular tester. I've been a QA lead, a test manager. I also have a blog where I like to, again, talk about stuff related to testing. You can find that under qablog.practice.com. Sometimes I speak at certain places, again, conferences, stuff like that. And my role within PractiTest is that of a solution architect, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about it so that you understand how that is related to testing. Now, we're testers, so we want to talk about concrete stuff. So for those of you who don't know, I still have my one wife. Nothing has changed there, still 3 kids. One dog, well, I forgot to update this. Right now it's 1 dog and 6 fish. So take that into account. Somehow we have 2 more small ones. And I've been doing testing for the last 18 years. Just to give you an idea, when I started doing testing, the biggest engine, internet engine in the world was called Ask Jeeves. Google was very small. People didn't know about them. And the biggest computer company in the world was IBM. Okay, just to put it on a perspective. That's back before the first bubble. And about my current role in PractiTest, first of all, I'm PractiTest Chief Solution Architect, which means that I'm all the time interacting with our users, trying to understand how they work with the system, try to see if there's anything we can learn from the ways that they're working, and hence I get to talk a lot about Agile methodologies and how to work on Agile in general. And within PractiTest, I'm also what we call the test junkie. And because we're an Agile firm, and we'll see it later, that means that everyone on PractiTest actually does testing in one way or another, but I'm the guy in charge of making sure that everything's actually being done in tune. Okay? Now, if we talked about PractiTest, the company that I work with, again, very quickly, this is not a sales pitch or anything like that, but so that you know, Practice is what it's called an ALM solution, a SaaS ALM solution. ALM stands for Application Lifecycle Management, or basically it's a QA management system. The idea behind Practice basically to provide a very simple and intuitive solution, but it's also a very methodological and flexible one. So if you have a complex process like many of you do, but you want still a tool that will be easy to use, then you can use us, obviously. We integrate with a bunch of other tools, very important if you're working on Agile projects, if you remember the last webinar we had. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, we have one of the best support teams in the industry. I'm also in charge of that support team, so go ahead and try us. you'll be amazed of how quickly we actually answer it. In any case, enough about PractiTest. And as I said, what I want to do right now, I don't want to go ahead over everything that we talked about before around Agile testing, but I do want to make sure that we have a shared ground to build upon. So let's start by understanding a little bit more about Agile development, maybe defining it, and then see how Agile testing actually fits into it. So if you remember the last session, we defined that Agile development, again, there are many people who will define it differently. This is the way that I like to define it myself. It's basically an iterative process, which means that you're not working on a 12-month or 18-month development process. You're working on very short, smaller processes of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks tops. The idea is to have quicker releases. So instead of having, again, one release after 18 months and then getting feedback from the customer, you try to release either every couple of weeks, every couple of months, and then get a lot of more feedback from the team still. That means that you're going to be releasing a usable product, so it's going to be challenging. It's based a lot on collaboration and less on documentation. So people will be talking a lot more and maybe writing less, and the idea is to make your process slimmer and quicker. And maybe the most important part of Agile is that it's a process that embraces change. It's a fact of life that things will change, requirements will change, users will change, the reality of our world will change rather quickly. And so Agile was here first and foremost to make sure that we're embracing that change. Now, this is with regards to shared definition of Agile development. Now, how does that affect testing? And again, remember, testing doesn't live by itself. The idea is that the testing process should actually adapt to the development process. And so the Agile testing process will basically need to adapt in the following way. If we're going to be having iterative processes, that means that we will need to have more focused testing, which basically means that if you're going to be touching this and this and these parts of the application, then your testing is going to be focused mainly on this and this part of the application as well. So you're going to be testing in a more focused way. On the other hand, if you're going to be releasing the product and you won't have time to test everything, that means that you will need to rely heavily on automation. Okay, so I said it in the past, and I'm a true believer of that. If you don't have an automation framework, then it's going to be very hard for you, if not completely impossible, to do good Agile testing. Now, we talked about collaboration, and collaboration is good because people are talking more to one another, but there's a problem in here, and that is that not a lot of what we need to test is going to be written down. So we'll need to work a lot on communication. And remember, communication, most people think about communication when you're talking, but here I mean communication when you're listening. Okay, so it will be very important for the Agile tester to all the time listen to everyone in the project, to understand what's going on, and to reach their own conclusions on the stuff that they need to go ahead and do. Okay, and last but not least, embrace change. Means that your project is going to be changing, your process is going to be changing, your reality is going to be changing, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if you're going to be working on a changing environment, on changing realities, that means that you cannot have a firm approach of testing, so you will need to work on a more risk-based approach of testing. So the way to embrace change is actually to learn to manage those risks and work in a risk-based testing approach. Okay, remember, that's on a very high level. Now, something that came out of the last session that we had, and it was maybe an offline conversation, and it was about Agile, and people were saying, hey, we work Agile that way, we work Agile that way, and some people were saying, hey, you don't really work Agile, you do work Agile. And I do want to make something very, very clear. Agile is a spectrum, okay? It's not a religion, it's not a defined process, it's an approach, okay? And so this basically means that two different teams may approach Agile on a very different way and still be working Agile. So this is one of the things that you will need to understand. If you look into one team that is successfully working in Agile their own way, you won't be able to adapt all the stuff that they're doing to your own way because everyone will be approaching Agile a little bit different. And some people might be on the left side of the spectrum, other people might be on the right side of the spectrum. And so the idea is to understand how everyone is working and adapting to that. Okay, again, something that came. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about from our previous session, and again, if you took something out of that session, I truly hope that it's to go ahead and read this book from Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory about Agile testing. And the most important part is actually their 10 principles for Agile testers. Okay, they're very good. It's a very cool read for every tester and developer in an Agile project. And because this session today, this webinar is focusing on Agile test management, then I do want to focus on these 4 principles for Agile testers, because I think that these are the cardinal principles when you're trying to understand what's the best way to manage your Agile testing process. And the principles are the one about providing continuous feedback to your project. Understand that you need to be delivering value to your customer all the time. To enable face-to-face communication, and remember, communication doesn't really mean, or doesn't only mean to talk. It means to provide information. And I guess that one of the biggest ones, how to respond to change. Okay, and be on that mindset on how to respond to change. Okay, now this is with regards to the last session. Let's move a little bit forward. And I want to start by trying to focus on understanding maybe the difference between Agile test management and non-Agile test management. Now, there's something very personal, and I do believe that testing as such, or test management as such, doesn't really live by itself. The idea of testing is to work on top of, or next to, or based on our development process. Okay, so in order to understand how to manage your Agile test process, then maybe we want to start by understanding that Agile test management, it's not very different from regular test management. But what is completely different is our environment and the circumstances of our development process. And I want to use an analogy that is completely away from development in order to try to pass along this point. Now, I want to talk about texting, okay? Texting on your cell phone, for example. I tend to think that the way that we used to develop projects and obviously test them about 15, 18 years ago when I started testing, resemble very much like this guy here, who's actually writing a text message while he's standing somewhere, okay? He's very relaxed, he's very calm. He has all the time in the world. Nothing is really affecting him. Again, someone might bump into him, but he will surely notice that. And again, he will know how to react to that. Now, what happens is that about, let's say 6 years after that, about 15 or 10 years ago, or even 12 years ago, we started to release faster products. Okay, we're still working waterfall, but we were releasing projects every 3 months. And so our life resembled more like this guy who's actually texting as he's walking. Now, you'll agree with me that it's a more riskier to text while you're walking, not because of the texting is the same texting, but because you might bump into something. You might not realize that you're stepping into the street and there's a green light and you will get run over. So it's difficult, and you need to concentrate on more stuff as you're actually doing it. Okay, it's still okay, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated. What happened was that XP, or extreme programming, was introduced about, I think it's about 12, it was introduced about 15 years ago, but it was most accepted about 10 years ago. And so life became like this. Okay, and right now we have this lady who's actually texting while driving her bike. And take into account, I think that this is very dangerous. You shouldn't do it. Okay, but if you notice, the reality meant that things are more complicated. She needs to concentrate on more things at once. Why? Because, well, she's riding faster right now. Someone might jump into the street and she might run over him, or again, a traffic light, or again, she's moving faster. So she will be able to concentrate less on her testing, and she will need to concentrate more on her surroundings. And basically what is happening today is that as people are embracing Agile, and the sad truth is that a lot of people are embracing Agile not in the best possible way, then our life basically is looking like this guy in here. And this guy is making something that is completely wrong. He's texting while he's driving, but I guess that many of us, while we're trying to manage testing on an Agile process, really feel like this guy here. We cannot concentrate on our testing. Everything is shifting very much around us. We don't really have control about what's going on in here. And we're being asked to do something that it's relatively impossible, if not completely difficult. And I guess that this is the feeling that many people have when they're being tasked to manage a testing process on an Agile environment while still trying not to affect too much the Agile environment itself. Okay? Now, it's important to understand As I said before, I don't think that the reality or the aim of our test management process has shifted too much. I think that this reality is still the same, but the circumstance, how we actually work on our testing projects, has actually changed, and that will have a very big effect on our testing system. But before we go into how to test on Agile projects, I want to ask, how do we actually test in our teams? Okay, what is the reasons that we test? Okay, let me just ask Noah. Okay, so again, there are many reasons to test. And if before we focus on why most of us test, well, some people might be testing because they have all sorts of product certifications to comply with. The FDA, ISO, many of those systems. I'm not going to be talking about the people who actually are working for these reasons. They have their own ways of testing, and it's relatively a simple way. If you stick to the rules, you will be able to work very correctly in this way. Well, there are also some people, not most of us, who are testing to ensure acceptance criteria of products. And that usually happens when someone else developed a custom built application and we're only testing to make sure that that custom development actually fits our needs. Many IT shops work that way. And again, it's something that it's been done by not a lot of people. But again, these are reasons to test. And there are some people who think that they're testing in order to find bugs. And well, basically, I think that if you think that you're testing to find bugs, you have it all wrong. Okay, because and I'm not going to open this for discussion right now, but if you were not the person who introduced the bugs in the first place, and you're not going to be the person who's going to be fixing the bugs once they're found, so why should you be finding them? Maybe the developer should actually be doing that. Okay, so if we're not testing for certifications, or we're not testing for any criteria, or we're not testing to find bugs, then why are we testing? Okay, and I really want you to ponder on this question. And this is something that I have done quite a lot, and I have worked with a lot of people on this question. And after a lot of thought, we found that the reason that we're testing is basically the following one. We're testing in order to provide our stakeholders with the visibility they need into the status of the product and the process. And we're doing that so that they can make the correct decisions. Okay? Now, I want you to think about this for a couple seconds. I want you also to focus on the main parts of this. Okay, we're basically testing because we have stakeholders in our projects, and these stakeholders need visibility. They need to understand what's the status, and the status that they need to know is the status of the product and the process. And the reason that they need it, it's for them to make their decisions. Okay, what decisions? It really varies, and we'll talk about that later on. And if we want to boil it down to the minimum, the reason that we're testing is because we want to help our stakeholders to make their correct decisions. Now, I want to stop here for a second. And again, this is something that I've talked with a lot of people in the last couple of years. And I want to put it in another way. If we're not here to find the bugs and we're not here to find the test and we're here to provide stakeholders with the information, then that basically means that if you were to have a crystal ball that can help you to provide those stakeholders the feedback they need in order to make their decisions, you would still be doing your job. Your job is not to run a test. Your job is not to find a bug. Your job is to help them make the decisions. Tests and bugs are the means that we have right now in order for them to make those decisions. But this is very important to understand. You need to understand what's the value that you provide in your organization. And once you understand what's that value, then you can focus your efforts on enhancing that value. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to test. I'm only saying that your test should actually be focused on these decisions for your stakeholders. Now, let's take this a step forward. If we need to be focusing on the stakeholders and their decisions, then we need to understand more about these decisions. First of all, we need to understand that most decisions will happen either at the beginning or towards the end of the project. Okay, at the middle, there will be some decisions to be made, maybe especially if stuff changes, but most of the important decisions will be at the beginning or at the end of the project. Second thing is that decisions will not only be based on the user stories or the requirements we get. And the simplest way of examining this is by saying, hey, even if your user stories don't say that the response time of your system shouldn't be better than it was before. It shouldn't be worse than it was before. It's still something that needs to be tested, because if it's worse, then your decisions need, your stakeholders will need to make decisions about it. Okay, so not everything will be defined, but they will still need to make those decisions. Now, something that is specific about Agile projects, and it relates to the guy who looked very, very crazy because he needed to do a lot of things at once and he couldn't concentrate on the texting he was doing because he was driving quite fast. It's something that relates to Agile projects. Especially on Agile projects, the decisions and the questions from our stakeholders will come very quickly and they will vary all the time. So one of the hardest things that I think happen to most test managers is that their decisions are being shifted all the time from many people around the world. Okay, and last thing to take into account is that each one of your stakeholders will be making different decisions. They will be making them at different times, and some of them will be based on different information. Now, if we're talking so much about stakeholders and their decisions, then one of the things that I want to propose here is that if we want to approach our Agile test management process in a better way, in a more focused way, or in a more aligned way, then maybe we need to start thinking about test management in a different way and start approaching test management in something that I called decision-driven test management. And decision-driven test management basically means the following. It says you need to start by understanding what are the decisions that your stakeholders will need to make, and then make sure that you have the information that they will need to get from your testing in order to bring that decisions into place. Okay? So it basically means start from understanding the data that you will need to provide, and then plan your test accordingly. Now, this doesn't mean that tomorrow you will start thinking about testing, but it's another thing that you need to take into account. And I think that this is the key to people who are managing to approach Agile testing in a correct way, or in a more sober way, or in a more productive way, are people who actually made that switch in their heads and understood that they have internal customers and these are their stakeholders. And what they are doing all the time is providing them information in order to make those decisions. Now, let's talk a little bit more on practice on how does decision-driven test management look like. And I guess the best way to exemplify how decision-driven test management look like is by focusing on this. Okay? If we try to understand, decision-driven test management doesn't focus on, as I said, not on the product, not on the tests that we're doing, but on the information that our stakeholders will need. Okay, and this is a very good example. The example is not the actual graphs that we have in here, but it's the fact that what we're trying to aim, our biggest deliverable, is going to be the information, the dashboards that we have, the emails that we have, the information that we're going to be giving, and to understand that this information is actually what we're going to be paid for. So we need to understand that those graphs and those dashboards and those emails are not the byproduct of our efforts. This is actually the deliverables. This is actually the product that we need to provide. And if we focused on that, then some important things that you need to consider or that you need to follow in order to, again, implement decision-driven test management correctly are the following ones. And again, I try to do it on a very high level. And if one of the things that we always said is that if you have specific questions about these webinars, you can always send us an email and we'll be more than happy to set up a short call and review them. And again, do a follow-up session if needed or something like that. But let's focus on decision-driven test management on a very high level, at least today. First thing to understand is that the information needs to be streamed via multiple channels. Okay, some people will like to see dashboards on their kitchens. Some people won't see it unless it's an email that is sent to them. Obviously, stand-up meetings, if you have them working on Agile projects every single day, you need to come up and say, hey guys, this is the reality of our project right now, and start from that. But understand that the same information needs to be provided and streamed on multiple channels in order to reach all the people that you want to reach all the time. Now, obviously, the whole process will start from mapping your stakeholders and listen carefully to what their needs are. Okay, and obviously, just as any iterative process, you will be able to provide better and better information over time. And maybe the first iteration, it won't be perfect, and the second iteration will be a little bit better. The third iteration, people will start asking you for information because they know that you will be able to provide it. But at the beginning, start by understanding who your stakeholders, who your internal customers are, and understand what information they need. Once you understand these needs, go ahead and plan your test cases and test sets based on their information. Okay, it's very important to capture the stuff that they will need to have. For example, and again, only an example. If it's very important to understand how our application is going to work on different platforms, then you want to capture for every test that you run it on what platform it ran. And then you can use these same test cases that you run for functionality in order to help you to provide the information that you want for environment testing or stuff like that. Okay? If you plan your test accordingly, you will be able to reuse them multiple times. And again, this is going to be very important on your Agile projects. A tip that actually comes from Agile testing, but again, I'm going to use it here. You need to plan your test to be run based on the latest time that you can run it. Okay, and this is counterintuitive, but the reason is the following one. When you're providing information to your stakeholders, this information needs to be timely. It needs to be recent. And so if you run, for example, a load test about 3 weeks ago, and since then a lot of your application has been modified, then the results of that load test are not relevant anymore. The same goes if you're bringing here some information about the latest bugs that are open in the system. If you haven't been testing on the right information, that on the right build, you won't be able to pass that information along. So when you're working on very short projects like Agile projects are, you need to make sure that you run your tests on the right time, and that's usually the latest time that you can start your testing in order to complete the testing and provide that information. Okay? And I guess the last thing specifically about decision-driven test management is to be ready to adapt your dashboards, your information, your testing as your project evolves. Especially if you're working on Agile projects, remember, Agile projects is about embracing change, okay? And so a very big problem for most of us in testing is that we started doing a bunch of test cases and all of a sudden we realized that everything that we just did, we can just throw it to the trash because it's not good, or we didn't run on the right version, or they're just changing a lot of stuff. Well, it's a rough life. You might as well just live with it. And you need to learn to adapt. Okay. And don't fall in love with your work, fall in love with the information that you're providing and the value. And so learn to embrace change. Okay. And again, this is around decision-driven test management. Just to wrap this section, the whole idea is that this is not the only way to focus on your Agile test management, but I think that if you try to embrace more and more about decision-driven test management, it will make your Agile testing process a lot easier. Now, let's move along. And again, what I want to do right now, it's, as I said at the beginning, we're currently working with a lot of testers as part of our work in PractiTest. We work with them on their methodologies, we work with them on their projects. One of the things that we're getting very good at is to listen on how they work in order to understand how we can help them do it better. And a byproduct of that is that we hear all the time about a lot of tips and tricks and stuff that helps them to manage their testing better. We're a test management solution, so we're obviously into how to manage test better. And so we got a lot of feedback on stuff that can be done in order to manage your testing process better on Agile projects. So let's go over them very quickly. Okay. And again, these are specific tips. Some of them might apply to some of you, but I think that all of them together have very big value. Now, the first one is to understand that in Agile projects, testing is a whole team approach. Okay, and I know that there are two main schools of Agile development projects. There are those who said that, well, you're only going to be having one tester in the team, so everyone will be doing a lot of hands-on testing. There are other schools of Agile development that says, hey, no, we still have developers and testers and everyone does their own thing. But regardless, even in those projects where you have testers and developers apart, still developers are in charge of doing a lot more of the tests that they were when they were working on other types of projects like waterfall projects. So the first thing that you need to make sure is that everyone in the team, especially your developers, know that they are expected to test. This is not something that you will be able to do as a test manager. This is basically a call that needs to come from your development manager or even your VP R&D or CTO or CIO, whoever it is. But that information should be passed to everyone on the team so that they know that they're expected to test and it's going to be part of their work, whether they want it or not. Let's be clear here. Now, once that has been done, it won't come overnight. And I wrote again, I was talking with Noah earlier, a blog about it. Even if you go and tell a developer to go ahead and test, at the beginning, he really won't know what to do. And if you go ahead and you ask your developers and you tell them, hey, go ahead and test this, he or she won't even know where to start from. Most developers think that what we do is some kind of voodoo magic, and we know where to look for bugs and we find them, and they don't realize that there's a lot more into testing. And so when you start working on an agile testing project, you will need to invest in a lot of training and guidance for your developers. You will need to teach them how to test. You will need to understand what can they test and what can they test. And again, you will need to do it very much. Now, you should be ready to do a lot of hand holding, but don't give in. If anyone here has 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds, or you remember how it was, um, at the beginning, people will say, hey, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. I don't know how to do it. You will need to do a lot of hand holding until they understand how to do it. But if you give in and you do it for them, then they won't do it at any time. Okay, so be ready to handhold, but it's handholding with the aim of teaching them how to do it better. Now, still on the part of working with developers, then there's a lot of that we can gain from doing pair work with developers. Okay, and again, pair work is when you take one developer, for example, and one tester, and you pair them together to do something. And so examples of very good feedback that we get from people who are doing pair work is basically when people do pair analysis and pair planning on features. That basically means you put a developer and a tester and they break their heads on how to plan and how to develop how to analyze the feature. And because they get both sides of the coin, meaning both how to develop and what's expected from them, then it's usually a lot better, okay, a lot faster and a lot more accurate from every other way. Now, there's pair development. If your testers are technical enough and they can just sit with the developers and help them to pair develop, that's going to be very cool for everyone. Obviously, for your testers, they will be more involved and you will get better code. And obviously, pair testing, as we were talking before, even when most of the tests will still be done by the QA team separate from the development team, you can do the delivery of the feature or of the user story to the testing by doing a pair testing session. It will help them to provide a lot of data, okay, and feedback, and help your developers to understand what are you going to be testing in the future, so that at the end of the day, their deliverables on their next phases will be better. Okay, so do as much pair projects or pair work as you can. Now, moving forward, additional tips that will help is to realize that you can prioritize the tasks of your development project based on testing concerns. Okay, and most times we don't realize we have that power within us. But the first thing that you can do is when people do the estimating part of your agile project, and remember, estimating is at the beginning where people try to weigh how much time and how much effort for each one of your user stories are going to be. Make sure that people do take into account testing, okay? And not only by saying, hey, if it's going to take us 3 days to develop, obviously it's going to be a day to test. No, testing is not related, at least not linearly, to development. So make sure that people do understand how much testing is going to go in place and make sure that that's accounted for. Okay, so that's going to be your part in there. And something that, again, we don't really realize that we can do is to ask the team to take risk management or basically risk into account when they're prioritizing. What do we mean by that? Well, it's very simple. If a feature or user story is more risky to do, then make sure that you do it before. Okay, and simply by saying that and by pushing that, then you will be able to help your team to, again, test better, have more time to test by yourselves. Talking about risks, and apparently I'm not the only crazy guy saying this all the time. One of the most important parts of agile testing is risk analysis, risk analysis, and risk analysis. Realize that you're not going to be able to test everything every time. You're working in short cycles, so you need to prioritize, you need to understand how things work and to make the correct decisions, even if they're the hard decisions. And one of the tips that I find very interesting, but it's very logical, but people really don't do it all the time, is to learn to test based on what some people call testing layers. And that means when you get a new feature, run a complete smoke test on it, and only then go ahead and do the more thorough testing. First of all, understand if it's complete, if there are very big things that are missing, report them, fix them, and then go ahead and compromise your work into do more low-level testing. Okay, it's something that every tester in the team needs to realize and needs to work based on that. Again, I'm getting signals here, so I'm gonna try to work a little bit faster on these tips. And again, Agile testing cannot work without automation, Agile test management either. So make sure that you have an automation framework in place. It's not about having a single test cases running automatically in Selenium or QTP or whatever. You need to have a good framework in place. Realizing that automation is development work. It's not something that can be done by someone who doesn't know how to write code. And if needed, to make sure that you have automation related user stories as part of your backlog. Okay? If needed be, that's something that is legitimate and you shouldn't be afraid of having them in there. Tip number 6, and well, basically it means that you need to be ready to blend exploratory testing and scripted testing together. And this comes out of a fad. I don't know where it came from, but most people say, hey, if you're working on agile development, then you don't need to have any scripted testing or any formal testing. We will do it exploratory and it will be okay. No, it doesn't work that way, guys. Exploratory testing, I love it. I do it quite a lot. It's a very important part about testing in agile development projects, but you still need to have your scripted tests, okay? And the reason is very simple. We're human and we make mistakes, especially when we're under pressure. So by having, even if we're talking about lean testing scripts or lean checklists, and making sure that we run them even as part of our sanity test sets before we release the product, that should give us enough confidence. Okay, but people who say that scripted testing is passe because you don't need it in agile development, well, they're basically not doing very good agile development or agile testing, because you still need to blend as much as possible in order to make sure that your coverage is good enough. Um, Another tip in here, and we only have two left before we actually go to the Q&A. And again, a very important one, I think. There's another fad in there that says that if you're working agile, you don't need to track issues. And the reason is because issues are going to be fixed on the spot. So why tracking them? Why reporting bugs? Why logging them into a system? And the plain truth is that no one will be able to fix all the bugs that they have. So some bugs will end up being on whiteboards, other in pieces of paper, other in emails, and they will get lost. Okay, so you will end up saying, hey, I remember that we had a couple of bugs. Do you remember all of them? And not realizing. And so you will be releasing bugs that you could have fixed before if you knew about them, if you remembered them. But because you were working on a very lazy way, you didn't track them, you didn't have them in there. So it's important. And the other reason to track your issues, it's also because you want to make sure, and if you remember correctly, very important part of agile is at the end of every cycle to understand what went right, what went wrong, and to fix the stuff that were wrong. So by tracking the bug data, you will be able to start talking about story maturity, team maturity, places where we know that we have more issues versus other places that we have less issues. So there's a lot of important information in tracking issues, and so you should not disregard bugs and track them, even if you're working agile. And again, our last tip on the agile test management, and we couldn't live without it, is to embrace change and to adapt to it. Okay, it's not only about, again, changing whenever it's needed, it's also about reviewing your assumptions and your progress constantly. Remember, when we did the estimations for our testing, they were based on assumptions. And maybe as we continue developing the product in our agile environment, 2 days from now, we will understand that these assumptions were wrong. Maybe we need to test more, maybe we need to test less. We need to make sure to adapt, and we need to make sure that just as our development counterparts are making changes as they realize more stuff, then we also need to make changes on the stuff that we do every day. And again, one tip that I added it here, even though it might have been a tip by itself, it's to understand what is the most important thing that you need to do each day and doing it, especially if you're working on an agile team. Reality will change, needs will change, priorities will change. And so if you're working on as part of an agile team, everyone in the testing team, everyone in the whole team should ask themselves at least once a day, what's the most important thing that I can do today? And make sure that you're going to be working on that most important thing. Okay, guys. So that's with regards to the tips that we have in there. And what I want to do right now is I want to go to Noah and go over some of the questions that you guys have had up to now. Okay, so give me a second, Noah. So what Noah is going to be doing, she's going to be coming and showing me some of the questions. If anyone has additional questions that you have or stuff that you want to go over, go ahead. And let's see the questions that we have right now. Okay, There's a question here about automation, and it says, if we don't have automation in place yet, does it mean that we cannot work on an agile project? And I mentioned automation quite a lot. And again, I do believe that you really need automation in order to work on agile projects. But the reason that you need automation is because you won't be able to test everything every single sprint. And still, it might be the case that you will need to release every single sprint. So if you're not testing, how can you release? And the plain answer is by having a good sanity suite to make sure that on every build, on every release that you're doing, you're covering enough the application in order to look for those bugs that are not trivial, for those bugs that you are not expecting them to be there. And so you will be able to go ahead and find them. It doesn't mean that you cannot work. It means that it's going to be harder. And I think that on the long run, if you don't have automation right now, you should actually make it one of your biggest priorities to have some sort of automation. And again, automation doesn't mean take the features that you're developing right now and create tests for them. No, it actually means by starting from your needs for automation. And that basically is go and have an automation sanity suite, then create a more robust sanity suite, and then start adding more and more automation as you can. But don't develop automation blindly. You need to have an automation test management plan in place in order to understand what needs to be developed. And it should be as part of a framework. Okay, it shouldn't be isolated scripts. And I hope that that answered that question. I'm here with Nora, and she's bringing me another question that you're asking. And remember, you can ask more questions if you want right now. Okay, could you provide answers to the question is, I like this one. Could you provide answers to developers when asking why we should do testing as if the testing, as it is the testing team's job? That's a great question. And I said it before. Guys, if your development management doesn't believe that the developer should be doing testing, then nothing that you can say or do will actually change it. This is a decision that needs to come from the very, very head. And people need to understand that the reason that developers and testers need to do testing is because you want to have a deliverable product at the end of 3 weeks. It's not humanly possible to have a deliverable ready product if testers will have, I don't know, 5 days of network in order to do it. So developers will need to go into the testing. And here it goes into the different types of agile testing that they can do. Again, in some teams, once they're not more developer tasks, then these guys simply switch ahead and start doing testing. And so you need to teach them, you need to give them scripts and help them to test. In other teams, development testing means that there's a certain threshold of quality or stability that the application needs to cover before they can release it to the QA. It really will depend on you. Now, and based on the specific question, if your development management, if your VP R&D or director or CTO or CIO does not believe that a developer should test, then nothing you can do about it. But if they do believe, then it's simply going to be their job. And how to explain it to them? Well, it's simple. There's not enough time to develop if they're not going to be able to test with you as well. Okay, and I hope that that actually answered. Okay, another thing here, automation with tools like play and record. Is it valid to automation on agile testing? Okay, another good question. Okay, and I'm going to explain it here. There's a lot of automation tool vendors that they say that there's no coding needed. You can just record the script, make some modifications on the GUI, and then just play it back and it will work. I'm not going to name names, but I used to be a QA manager for an automation tool, actually very widely used. And one of the things that we hated was when our salespeople used to say that, because everyone knows that it's impossible. Okay, you might record a script and play it back, and it might work during the first build, but then you change something small in the GUI, it won't work. And if you want to have a very robust automation framework, then it's going to work even less. Most GUI automation tools are based on object recognition on the GUI. And as your objects will be shifted left or right or modified a little bit, or even the colors are going to change, it won't work. So the plain answer is no, record and playback doesn't work. It might be a good start, but as I said before, automation is development work. There are a lot of companies, for example, I love it on Google, I think that they call it developer in test or developer engineering test. And that means that you have people who are doing development work around the testing, the automation testing teams. And I think that that's the best approach to do it. On the other hand, and something that I talked about before, I think that every tester should be at least technologically able. And um, I can speak by myself. I didn't know how to write code for a long time, even while I was working in testing, and then I learned how to do it. So you can learn how to write code, but that means that you don't need to have a computer science degree in order to do automation testing, but you should actually approach automation as development's work and not as record and playback. Okay, I'm trying to move to another question here. We don't have a lot of time, and we do have a lot of questions here. So I will start by raising here. Okay, in case we adopt decision-driven test management, how can we deal with many decisions coming from different departments, internal customer stakeholders going into different directions, the training department, project management, consulting, everyone may have different priorities and need different information. So how can we prioritize in order to provide all the information that the stakeholders will need from our test management dashboard? It sounds like a question that I would have written if it wasn't written by one of our customers here. Sorry. This is a great question. I'm going to try to explain a little bit. If you're going to be doing decision-driven test management, that means that your approach is going to be a lot different. And that means that instead of focusing on your product and saying, hey, this is how the product works, and I'm going to tell you how each feature works, and I'm going to tell you how the performance of the system is, I'm going to try to go the other way around and try to understand what information is going to be interesting for everyone and try to give that information back. At the beginning, it won't be easy. And I can tell you for sure, the first iteration, the first two iterations, the first three iterations, you won't be able to do it very, very well. So you will want to blend it in. But the whole idea is that you want to start focusing more and more on what's interesting to everyone else, what's interesting to your stakeholders. So how do you prioritize? Start by prioritizing among your stakeholders. There are stakeholders that are more important than others, and it might sound bad, but that's the way it is. Your product owner, your CXOs are going to be more important than your support manager, for example. So you will start by saying, hey, what's important for you guys? Let's make sure that we have all the answer for you guys. You don't even need to tell them that you're changing anything up front. You can say, hey, you know what? I want to start by understanding what information you needed from us and we didn't provide it to you the last sprint. Can you tell me what data were you looking for? And then make sure that on the next sprint, you will be able to provide it upfront before he asks for it. Okay, and once you have the initial circle of people, start broadening that circle more and more in order to include more people. The more automatic the way that you're going to be working, the more information you're going to be gathering. Once you create your first set of dashboards, then it will be very easy for you just to move them over and continue getting that information. So decision-driven test management is also an iterative approach. And it's something that starts by prioritizing. Try to understand, okay, these are the three stakeholders I'm going to be focusing on this iteration. Maybe I'm going to be focusing them on two iterations. Then I'm going to be adding a new one and a new one another time. And again, continue expanding your circle. One of the things that is going to be very interesting is that as you start providing more information to higher and higher stakeholders, they will start coming to you for that information up front. So instead of you needing to go to them and say, hey, what information do you need? You will start getting emails that says, hey, Joe, you know what? I want to get this. Do you have that info here? Maybe not for now, but for the next release. Make sure that you start gathering that info more and more, and obviously you will get more visibility higher up, obviously. Okay, going over to another question. Okay, I like this question here. Out of all the tips that we had for Agile Test Management, what's the most important tip? That's a very personal question, I think. Some people will tell you that automation is the most important tip. I've worked in enough Agile testing projects, so for me, the most important tip is to always understand that you're working the most important thing to do each day. I find it amazing, but one thing that is in common in most Agile projects is that priorities change, realities change, circumstances change, questions change on a daily basis. So before you start working 3 days on something and then asking if it's important, it's as simple as during the daily stand-up meeting each morning, say, hey guys, I'm going to be working. This is what I did yesterday. This is what I'm going to be doing today. This is what might be on its way. Is there anything that might be more important for me to do today? Okay, go ahead and ask it. Remember, you're not a developer. You're here to provide services to the rest of the team. So it's as easy as going inside and asking, hey, is there something more important that anyone here thinks that I should be doing today? Feel free to ask that question. It might sound weird at the beginning, but as you get very good answers, then you'll know that you're on the right track there. Okay, so I'm getting here hand messages, signals that we're getting closer to the end. So I guess those are the questions that we're going to be answering today. Guys, if anyone has additional questions, we're sorry that we didn't get to answer them. Feel free to go ahead and send us those questions. You can send them to us. To myself, Joel at PractiTest.com. You know what? Let's actually switch over. And again, very quickly about PractiTest. This is a slide that I wanted to talk. If you have any specific questions, you can feel free to send them to me. My email address is very simple, joel at PractiTest.com. And again, I will be more than happy to continue the conversation just as we did previously. I also have a QA blog I mentioned before. Go ahead and read it. And again, we hope that we were able to help you on today's session. And again, we're invited to the next of the sessions that we're going to be having. So thank you very much for everyone for your time. And again, we'll be in touch. Bye-bye and thanks.